guys, your Geordie Journos here at the Signal Iduna Park. I think I actually said that one right this time. Underwhelming, difficult night for Newcastle United. Just didn't feel like they lived up to their own expectations, in my opinion. You guys have spoken to Eddie Howe. You've had an opportunity to, everyone out there will have an opportunity to read everything there is with regards to what Howe said. I know there's bits about Callum Wilson and other players as well ahead of Bournemouth. Dom's been doing his bit on the Shields Gazette, to check that out, and Jordan here on Newcastle World, so you'll be able to find all that stuff there. Let's get our opinions. Jordan, I'll come to you first. Thoughts on this evening, star men and improvements needed, or anything about the future? Give us your thoughts.
Yeah, ultimately one of major disappointment, because today I didn't feel like there was that much between the two sides, if I'm brutally honest. There was a key moment in that game where it sort of changed it for me. So I thought it was, Dortmund probably shaded the first half, to be honest, but that second half Newcastle came out strong, and it was that chance by Joe Linton. It was a brilliant cross by Tune Livramento, and Joe Linton, was it 4 or 5 yards out, gets a header, glances it wide, and yeah, the second goal, what happens? Dortmund go and get it, and it was a fine margin, that, because I thought Newcastle had promising spells in that game. I thought, as I say, the first 15 minutes of the second half, I had Dortmund pegged in a little bit, but I just unfortunately couldn't score. And if you look at the two games as a whole. Now, I said at the time against the sort of Dortmund home game that I didn't feel like Newcastle were too threatening in that game, but as you watched it back in that last 15-minute spell at St James's Park, they could have quite easily got a result then. But here we are, little under a fortnight exactly, and Newcastle have lost both games and they haven't scored a goal. So we talk about Champions League group. Obviously, we don't know. Well, Champions League group, it looks like now Newcastle are going to have to at least go to Paris next and get a result, and that is a very difficult task. When this group got drawn and we've seen the middle games were against Borussia Dortmund, it felt like the group would be decided on that in terms of qualifying for the last 16. Newcastle have lost both games, and ultimately they face a very difficult task, an uphill task now, of getting out of this group. You mentioned star man there. I thought Tino Livramento was probably the star man for Newcastle, a real positive. His Champions League debut, first half, tough one for him. Be on the right hand side of the attack, and pretty much had his back to goal, really, which is not what he is about. Second half, he went back to right back, broke forward as he can at the start of that second half, then moved to left back. I thought overall he was really solid in that second half, and Newcastle's best performer. And then you look at other performances, probably a Bruno. I know he split opinion online, but I thought he done okay today. And trying to think, look, it was
maybe.
Yeah, it was.
Made his saves, and
it was just a really disappointing night, because I don't feel like Newcastle were too far away from Dortmund tonight. But you see, look at the two games. They've only lost the two games, and I do think that could be pivotal when it comes to the end of this group and when Newcastle will finish up.
Yeah, it's fine margins that could cost Newcastle. These two games against Dortmund, not particularly high on quality. I just think Newcastle, as Eddie Howe said, just not quite being at their absolute best. They were at their absolute best against PSG, but it almost seems like they saved it just for that game. Obviously, injury crisis at the moment, but not really affecting them in the Premier League. The 9 games unbeaten domestically, but back-to-back defeats in the Champions League. They've failed to score in 3 of the 4 group stage games, whereas domestically, again, only Man City away they've failed to score this season. So it's not quite clicking in the continental competition for Eddie Howe's side. And yeah, it's just those fine margins. It was the woodwork last time against Dortmund, and tonight it was that Joe Linton header. A few shots on target as well, but I don't think the Dortmund keeper was really tested too much. And yeah, you're going into that PSG game away basically needing a win, but we went into this game thinking really Newcastle need to get a result to keep the chances of getting out of the group the right way into the last 16 alive and having a decent chance anyway. Now it's a real uphill task, and potentially the injury crisis gets worse as well, with, as Liam said, Callum Wilson going off at half time with a concern regarding his hamstring. So Eddie Howe said it was too soon to say whether he'll miss the Bournemouth game at the weekend, but it's just looking, that threadbare squad gets that little bit thinner, and it's just not clicking or not translating, you could say, the domestic form into the Champions League as it stands.
Very harsh on Matt Ritchie and Emil Kraft there, who'll be providing a boost to the Newcastle United bench at Bournemouth at the weekend. I think anybody who wants my thoughts can probably go to the near 30-minute live that I did just after the game, when my internet finally allowed me to do it here in Dortmund. I'm going to kind of echo a little bit what the lads said. Finest margins. I'm going to point to that Callum Wilson chance in the first game. I think if he sticks that away, Newcastle are going to win that game. And I also think today, of course, Joe Linton, I think it's difficult to argue that wasn't the pivotal moment in the game. If he scores, this game has a totally different complexion. Very much both games mirrored each other. 1-0 leads at the break, with one team dominating.
And that's starting to hurt.
I know, I'll take that one off. and then it kind of things moved on from there. That Newcastle United were probably the dominant force in the second half. Took a lot of risks and went for it, and looked like some tired bodies, I thought, towards the end of that game. The finest of margins decide things. When you're dining at Europe's top table, you know, the finest of margins can make the biggest of differences. And I think these Champions League games, there will be some criticism out there, and I think you're both correct in alluding to that with regards to the form and goals and lack of and things like that in the Champions League. But what I would say is it just feels like these Champions League games are a game too far almost every time, in my opinion. The group was always going to be decided by Newcastle United's home form, and that loss to these lot a couple of weeks ago almost felt like a nail in the coffin. I think everybody kind of hoped that, and you never write this team off, hope they can come back and do things. And look, let's not 100% write them off as well. There's nothing stopping them going to Paris and getting something, but they're going to need more bodies in their ranks if they're going to do that. It's tough. It's tough at Europe's top table, and Newcastle United's time will come in this competition. I've got absolutely no doubt about that. It was maybe a season too early, in my opinion. And that sounds rubbish, really, for me to say that. Like, I'm writing everything off, and everything has been achieved, and everything is done, and there is always a need for some perspective. But I think for me, you've got to judge as you see, and we've got to hold ourselves to higher standards than ever just saying, oh, you were fighting relegation 18 months ago, 2 years ago. Because I don't think that's really relevant now. This team is different. It's moved on immeasurably. It's just the squad that at times looks a bit threadbare, and it really is coming to pass now that the extra games in midweek, at the intensity they're played at, it's not like I've said on here before, they haven't had a bye in this competition. They've got the hardest group of any English team probably in years to come into this competition, especially, you know, in sort of recent era debutants who hadn't been in this competition for 20 years. So it was the toughest baptism of fire that any teams had, and they're really struggling. I don't really see them going to Paris and getting too much, and I think that could see them out of this competition. That could have silver linings. No European football at the back end of the year could easily see Newcastle get themselves back in the top four mix, because as Dom quite rightly points out, they're on fire. No matter how many players are out, they're on fire in the Premier League. They're really difficult to beat. Look like scoring against anybody. They haven't against Dortmund. It's been tight. Dortmund, look, the thing I would say about these two games as well, it's not like Dortmund have absolutely dominated. It's not like they've had a stack full of chances. In the key moments in these two key games, which has ultimately decided Newcastle's Champions League fate, in my opinion, they've taken their chances and had that final third quality, when Newcastle United on the night have lacked. And I think that is probably ultimately what's going to underline this Champions League campaign. It's lessons to be learned. Newcastle will be stronger for the January window, I'm sure. They will be stronger for the summer window, I'm sure. And hopefully can be back at places like this in the not too distant future. Look, there's still 2 games to go. Nothing is won and lost yet. Newcastle United could get 6 points, and I think 6 points would take them through. I really do. I just think 6 points, having only picked up 4 in the first 4 games, or both in the first 2 games, is a very difficult ask against PSG on the home turf, as the man fires his tractor up again behind him. If you've been hearing that all the way through, some bizarre man driving this tractor through the yellow wall there. Probably the most noise it made all night. For all the Dortmund fans out there. No, and credit to the Geordies who came here tonight. They outsung this yellow wall. If that drum wasn't beaten, you would barely have heard a thing from this stadium. It was like a morgue. Honestly, it really was like a morgue at times. I said that on the live. As soon as the drum stopped, it was like a morgue. So I was underwhelmed by the yellow wall. Great stadium, great fans, fantastic experience. Not the cacophonous noise, not the intimidating atmosphere that I almost expected when Newcastle United came here. And that sort of brings us on to the 2 debutants, and I'm going to quickly talk about this. I realise I'm chatting away here. It was a tough one for one, and it was a really good one for another. Tino Livramento looks every bit the exciting player that everyone hoped he would be. A tremendous player with big long legs who stretches them and gets right up the pitch, and has that, I've mentioned it here before, almost that Kyle Walker like recovery pace and ability to nick the ball off anybody. But then when he sees a gap, he attacks it, and he was man of the match. That lad's started 3 games for Newcastle United this season, against Manchester City, Manchester United, here away at Dortmund in his Champions League debut, 20 years old, and been man of the match in all 3 games. That is an incredible start to life at Newcastle United, cannot be argued with. Lewis Hall, to me, and I think that the thing I mentioned on the live, which you guys probably won't know yet, but I said essentially it's a harsh environment when you're party type. We've had to relocate because there was some Latino rave music going on, and we thought that our video would get struck off for copyright issues, so we've jumped inside this very bright yellow wall of its own here behind us.
Just as you spoke so positively about your
yes.
This
is a more lively yellow wall. No, I would not say that would put people around. We're only having a bit of fun here. That's what the Geordie Journals is all about, right? I don't think there's a whole lot. What was I talking about?
Lewis Hall.
Lewis Hall, yeah. So you've got to hold Lewis Hall to the same standards you would have anybody else starting in Newcastle United's team. It's a really tough environment for him to be thrown into. But he didn't stand up to it tonight. He had a really tough evening. A young lad who hasn't played a lot of football. Tino Livramento is clearly a long way ahead and has played a lot more games in the Premier League than what Lewis Hall has. He really hasn't had a lot of football at all. But when you start a Champions League game at the very highest level for Newcastle United, you've got to be judged on the level of everybody else in that team, and I think he had a really tough one. His time, I'm sure, will come, but he needs a bit of coaching, he needs a bit of looking after. I don't think Eddie Howe and an ideal world would have wanted to throw players like that in, throw them into the lion's den, because sometimes you sink, sometimes you swim, and sometimes people take longer than others to develop. Sometimes it takes them a few mistakes to get to the point where you want to be, and I've no doubt you will get there. Go on, sorry.
Well, yeah, you touched on it there, but it's probably best to touch on the team selection as well, because I think the start 11 surprised us. The team sheet, there was 3 changes. The big one was Anthony Gordon dropping out, but to see Lewis Hall in there, Tino Livramento, we expected to play what we thought would be at right back with Trippier left back, and then Joe Willock coming into the midfield as well. It was quite a bold selection call, but Eddie Howe afterwards spoke about the schedule, and he actually thought that this game was too quick of a turnaround and they could have done with another day. Could have done with this game on a Wednesday. So yeah, did Eddie Howe get his team selection right? I think his hand was probably forced. I think if he could have started Anthony Gordon, I think he probably would have. Probably says a lot that he didn't in the state that he's currently in. Like a lot of these players, these players do look dead on the feet, and I think this international break comes at a good time, but the players that do look knackered, one in particular, Kieran Trippier, he looks fatigued, and who can blame him, because he has played every game for club and country since the start of the season, and ideally you'd want him to have a break during the 2 weeks, but he's probably going to be called up by England, isn't he, and he's probably going to play as well, so a real missed opportunity there. But I think you've said it before, Liam, how can you tell a 33-year-old that, look, don't play for England, can rest yourself and come back.
He's accumulating
fresh.
caps. He wants to play as much for his country as he
Of course he
possibly can. And how the hell would you tell him not
Yeah.
to? Dom, thoughts on that? Team news before I have my final say, and I think we'll have to wrap it up from there.
Yeah, I thought the team selection from Eddie Howe was probably influenced by he wanted something off the bench. Because if you have Joe Willock and Lewis Hall on the bench, for example, Joe Willock can change games and can bring something different, but you're limited. Whereas Miguel Almiron, Anthony Gordon, players who've scored 7 goals between them this season, they do provide a pace and threat. And I think when they came on, weren't amazing or anything like that, but Newcastle did pose a lot more of a threat in the second half, and Anthony Gordon got in pockets of space, made runs that Callum Wilson just couldn't quite make in the first half. And Miguel Almiron, I think, had more shots than any other Newcastle player. Just a shame all 3 of them, I think, were quite poor efforts in the end. But yeah, I think that was probably part of Eddie Howe's thinking, giving him an option, and Newcastle was still very much in the game at that point, and I just thought, yeah, they did improve things after the break. It was just a shame that it was late on. As Jordan said, Kieran Trippier, a player who looks a little bit tired. Set pieces have often been faultless really, but recent weeks just lacking, fails to beat the first man, and then counter-attack from Dortmund puts the game to bed, which ultimately could end Newcastle's chances of progression to the last 16. So yeah, shame, disappointing night on the whole, but we'll move forward from here and look ahead to Bournemouth at the weekend.
Yeah, I've not got a massive amount to add to that, because I think it's a little bit of both. I think he was keen not to absolutely keep flogging the same players. I think Anthony Gordon was due a little taken out of the team, a little bit of a rest, considering he put everything into Manchester United, Arsenal in the games previous to that. Miguel Almiron, he's been trying to rest, and he was desperately trying to do it at Man United last week and wasn't able to do it. But I also do think the big part of that was he knew it'd be tight, and it was as tight as the first game, and he wanted to have that second half influence with the best player that Newcastle have had this season, Anthony Gordon. It just didn't quite play out like that, and it is, as we've all mentioned on here, the finest of margins that decide these type of games, and Newcastle have been on the wrong side of it. They'll learn from it, they'll come back better, and I'm sure this won't be the last time we come to places like this, and Newcastle will hopefully next time put on a better performance and show everybody and show Europe exactly how good they can be, because they've been a tremendous team in the Premier League, not as good in the Champions League. Is that the opposition? Is that the level that they find themselves at now? I think we won't know until probably Newcastle United next play, which will be PSG end of this month. Right, I'll run through the T's and C's, lads, unless you've got anything to add. Bit of a shorter one from us guys here, but we're about to get kicked out of the Signal at Duna Park, because we're pretty much the last people here, and I think a lot of these people want to get home to their beds. Right, like, comment, share, subscribe, click the bell, and you'll get the latest Geordie Journos videos straight into your device. And yes, that's goodbye, good night from the lads here, the Geordie Journos at the Signal at Duna Park.